Hello and welcome to The Political Sphere, the show focusing on the biggest stories in politics in the last week. I'm Lawrence Jeffcoat and here are the big political stories from the past week. Starting the week off in Australian politics, it started off quite difficult for the Federal Liberal National Party, as the party suffered a hard loss in the Victorian state election, where the party suffered a swing of -6%, culminating in the resignation of the Victorian Liberal Party leader and later the resignation of the party president. With Federal Liberal National Party MPs focusing on making sure the election is about who Australians prefer between Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Opposition Leader Bill Shorten, Member of Parliament Julia Banks announced her resignation from the LNP and announced she would be becoming an independent. Miss Banks' resignation placed blame on the treatment of women, stating that across both the major political parties, the level of regard and respect for women in politics is years behind the business world. Miss Banks also squarely placed blame on a change in the LNP, which she said was caused by a regressive right wing, which did not listen to the people. Although the news had taken the LNP by surprise, the question still stands as to whether this will impact the hopes of re-election for the government. An election which was essentially announced this week through the announcement of the next budget. The next budget will be released on April the 2nd, 2019, before the next election, and Prime Minister Scott Morrison said that when asked about the election date, it would have to be held by May 18th. And looking to the US now, where there has been a storm of border news, both figuratively and literally. Earlier this week, the US-Mexican border between Tijuana and San Diego was closed due to an apparent members of a migrant caravan trying to cross the border over the border fence and through car lanes. In response, the border officials deployed tear gas, with reports of some migrants throwing objects such as bottles and rocks at border officials. The majority of migrants near the border were protesting slow wait times. President Trump later responded to the news on Twitter, stating the following, which can be seen on screen. News around the border continued, with President Trump stating in an exclusive interview with Politico he would be totally willing to allow for a government shutdown if he does not receive the $5 billion of border wall funding he wants from Democrats. The president has also threatened similar action before, but it is yet to be seen as to whether the Democrats will meet this demand. Congress must pass at least 7 appropriation bills by December 7th to avoid a government shutdown. And lastly, for this week in political news, we look towards the G20 summit in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where international leaders have met. The highlights of the first day included Prime Minister of Australia Scott Morrison explaining the system of a leadership spill and how he received the job title of Prime Minister to President Donald Trump. However, the big deal for most nations was ensuring the rift between the US and Chinese trade can be mended through the removal of trade tariffs, which have been installed during the recent so-called trade war between the US and China. Both President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping are scheduled to meet for dinner, although a meeting between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin had been cancelled. This move came after Trump's former attorney Michael Cohen had new allegations relating to Trump's Russian business ties. These allegations can be seen in some external sources in the description, along with sources that I have used in these stories in the description below. Be sure to like the video and comment what you thought of the past week in the political sphere. This week's episode has been slightly shorter as I am travelling this week and also does not include any video, which I hope to add in soon. So stick around and be sure to tune in next week.